And when we say, hey man, shout out to FBAs, what is xenophobic? What is this xenophobic shit? We're all black, nigga. Shout out to FBAs. What about us? What about we all black? The white man, if the police pull you over, they're not going to ask if you're FBA. What are you giving props to FBA for? And you won an award too, Mr. Nigerian. You're going to get a scholarship for $50,000. Move, nigga. Shout out to Igbo, Yoruba, to my tribes back home in Nigeria. I'm nothing like the Akatas. I'd like to thank.
This is my news of today. I will read what universities think about FBA so-called movement, whether it is fascism and black skin, after which I will show videos that claim to debunk the FBA Israelites. Fascist, black Americans, TARIQ NASHEED and the FBA. Inside the FBA movement, TARIQ NASHEED's digital nationalism, the new Jim Crow movement. In the vast and often chaotic world of social media live streams, a familiar face continues to spark both laughter and outrage. The self-styled historian and filmmaker TARIQ NASHEED, founder of the Foundational Black Americans, or FBA, movement. In tonight's special report, we look inside one of his most recent online broadcasts. A 2-hour stream that, within minutes, turned into a mix of comedy, political commentary, and outright hostility toward non-American black communities. What begins as satire soon becomes something much darker. A study in how online identity movements can slide into digital nationalism. The stage is set. NASHEED appears seated before a camera, framed by neon lighting and the unmistakable confidence of a man who knows his audience well. He starts casually, joking, improvising, reading comments aloud. Within moments, however, his tone sharpens. He imitates Afro-Latino celebrities who publicly identify as Puerto Rican or Dominican rather than black. He scoffs, "I know I look black, but I'm really Puerto Rican. Puerto Rico runs through my veins." The chat explodes with laughing emojis. But behind the humor lies a familiar accusation. That non-FBA people, as NASHEED calls them, borrow blackness only when it's convenient. From humor to hostility. NASHEED then welcomes a caller named Lamar from South Carolina. Their exchange seems harmless. Two men talking about lineage, history, and community pride. But quickly it becomes political. Lamar suggests creating a new FBA-based political party. NASHEED disagrees. "We don't need to reinvent the wheel," he says. "Just stay on code. We don't vote until we get something." His something, of course, refers to reparations, a central demand in FBA ideology. It's a strategy that mirrors how other ethnic groups, from Native Americans to immigrants, have lobbied for targeted benefits. But NASHEED's tone is exclusive. He insists that only foundational black Americans, descendants of U.S. slavery, should lead or represent the black experience. The outsider narrative. Halfway through the stream, NASHEED repeats a line his followers know well. "We don't need non-FBAs representing us." He accuses Caribbean and African Americans in leadership roles of misrepresenting the true lineage of U.S.-born descendants of slavery. It's a worldview that scholars call lineage nationalism, where race alone isn't enough. Ancestry defines belonging. Dr. Marcia Reed, a sociologist at Howard University, explains, "This is identity politics within identity politics," she says. "What we're seeing is the fragmentation of blackness itself. Comedy as a weapon." NASHEED's show then drifts into a different rhythm. He flirts with callers, teases his moderators, and tells a story about his early years in Atlanta. The humor is quick, charismatic, and undeniably entertaining. But every few minutes, the jokes circle back to the same targets. Immigrants, foreigners, and off-code black people. For his fans, it's funny. For critics, it's dangerous. Comedy, in NASHEED's world, isn't just entertainment. It's a delivery system for ideology. The confrontation. Around the 1-hour mark, the show takes a hostile turn. A man with an accent, possibly East African or Middle Eastern, joins the call. What follows is 5 minutes of relentless mockery. Nash sneers. You look like a rotten banana. Flies ask you for directions to someone who smells better. He ridicules the caller's accent, complexion and background, comparing him to a pirate, and telling him to go back to his refugee camp. The audience laughs. He gains digital gifts. And for millions watching clips later, the line between humor and hate becomes almost invisible. The myth of the musty foreigner. Nash continues. He turns the conversation toward what he calls FBA hygiene. FBA women don't tolerate must. He laughs. They'll hand you deodorant out the purse. The insult is aimed at African immigrants. Yet, beneath the jokes lies a hierarchy, a belief that one group of black people is culturally superior to another. Cultural critic Ava Richardson describes it as interracial xenophobia. It's prejudice repackaged as pride. She says, it gives people permission to look down on others who look just like them. The power of the microphone. By the end of the broadcast, the tone lightens again. Fans flood the chat with hearts and compliments. Nash smiles, shouts out names, and invites more callers. He leaves his audience laughing, and that's part of the reason his influence endures. In a digital landscape driven by algorithms, outrage and entertainment travel at the same speed. And TARIQ Nasheed has mastered both. The larger picture. The FBA movement isn't new, but it's growing. Its message, that the descendants of US slavery deserve specific recognition and reparations, resonates with many who feel left behind by mainstream politics. Yet, its delivery often alienates potential allies across the African diaspora. Experts warn that such digital movements can easily radicalize through repetition. Every joke, every viral clip, reinforces a worldview of us versus them. Not between races, but within them. When your movement is built on exclusion, it can't build lasting solidarity. It only builds followers who enjoy the fight. Digital nationalism in the age of influence. This phenomenon isn't limited to Nasheed or the FBA movement. Across platforms, charismatic figures use live streams to blend activism, comedy, and personal branding. They become both leaders and performers, monetizing identity itself. Nasheed's broadcasts draw thousands of viewers at once, and millions of replays across TikTok and YouTube. Each stream becomes a virtual rally, a mirror of a larger debate. At its core, the controversy surrounding TARIQ Nasheed raises a difficult question. Can a movement rooted in justice avoid becoming a mirror image of the prejudice it condemns? Supporters argue that he is simply defending the specificity of African American history, a heritage often diluted in global conversations on race. Critics say he weaponizes that history to divide, not unite. Both may be true, and both reveal how social media rewards confrontation more than conversation. Closing reflection. As the stream ends, Nash signs off with charm and swagger. His audience, loyal and laughing, waits for the next episode. But for observers outside that digital echo chamber, the message is sobering. In the age of live stream politics, charisma can outpace conscience, and humor can disguise hostility. What began as a late-night comedy show ends as a case study in how easily entertainment becomes ideology. It is a reminder that in today's media ecosystem, words are currency, and every viral clip carries a price. As we analyze, we conclude what FBA means. FBA stands for Foundational Black Americans, a term created and popularized by TARIQ Nasheed around 2019. It describes Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States. On paper, it's framed as a lineage-based identity, a way to distinguish between US-born Black Americans and more recent African or Caribbean immigrants. Supporters say it's about reparations, recognition, and protecting Black American culture. The controversy. Critics, including many scholars and civil rights observers, argue that the FBA movement has drifted into xenophobia and exclusion, especially online. FBA influencers often attack African, Caribbean, and Afro-Latino communities, calling them tethers or foreigners who steal Black culture. The movement promotes a rigid us versus them mindset among people of African descent. Some FBA activists harass or dox critics online, using racially charged insults against non-FBA black people. Because of these traits, some experts and journalists describe the FBA movement as ethno-nationalist, which means it promotes nationalism based on ethnicity or ancestry, not just shared culture or race. Is it fascist? Strictly speaking, FBA is not an organized fascist movement in the classic political sense. It has no central party, no military or paramilitary wing, and no formal hierarchy like historical fascist movements. However, it shows several fascist-like tendencies in its online rhetoric and group behavior. Fascist trait FBA parallel in rhetoric/behavior. Ethno-nationalism, belief in national purity based on lineage. FBA promotes lineage purity. Only descendants of U.S. slaves are real black Americans. Scapegoating outsiders. FBA leaders often blame African and Caribbean immigrants for social/economic problems facing U.S. blacks. Charismatic authoritarian leader TARIQ Nasheed personality dominates the movement. Dissent is often mocked or silenced. Propaganda and mythic history. FBA media retells U.S. black history as a unique, divine struggle separate from the rest of the African diaspora. Culture of ridicule and hostility toward critics. Online FBA spaces frequently attack journalists, historians, and activists who challenge them. So while FBA is not fascist in a formal political party sense, it does exhibit proto-fascist or ethno-chauvinist patterns, meaning it uses exclusionary nationalism, hero worship, and scapegoating similar to what you'd see in far-right movements, but rebranded through Black American identity. Academic viewpoint. Most scholars categorize FBA not as fascist but as a populist ethno-nationalist movement. It's fueled by real frustration about racial injustice and economic inequality, but those frustrations are being channeled toward hostility against fellow black people, rather than systemic power structures. Sociologist Dr. Christina Greer, Fordham University, describes it this way: it's a movement born from legitimate pain, but it risks turning inward, mistaking solidarity for purity. In summary, not formally fascist, but has fascist-like behaviors in rhetoric and structure. Ethno-nationalist and xenophobic in many of its online expressions. Centered around one personality, TARIQ Nasheed, who profits from both controversy and loyalty. Dangerous potential. By replacing solidarity with suspicion, it weakens global black unity and feeds social division, like the KKK or Jim Crow. This was my report of today. Now gonna show some educational videos which claim to debunk the FBA Israelites.
Shalom and welcome to another video at the Genesis 49ers page. Today's topic is going to be a goodie. It's going to be speaking about Japhet and how Japhet is a dark-skinned race. It's a Negroid race originally. And we're going to explain that through various sources. But before we go into the topic of today, I want to bring out two definitions. The first one is Euhemerism or Euhemerism, an interpretation of myths as traditional accounts of historical persons and events. That's one method we're going to use today, because the farther you go back in time, the more mythological events get. A lot of ancient people would take real historic events and make it into a mythos. Okay. Second definition, apotheosis, to grant someone or other god status, or an other god status. Deification, to deify. So it's basically the same thing. So a lot of people would deify their ancestors. I brought that out about the tribe, the Mayans, how they would deify their ancestor Zebulon. Okay, because that's within their mythos. They have a god named Zebulon. Okay, but we're dealing with Japhet, which mainly is the Greece, Thracians, and different European original people, the aboriginals of those lands. Okay, the Medes, what north of Turkey. So let's get right into it. Japhet, the Negroid race, because again, they were originally a Negroid race, and that's what I'm going to prove. Some people walk around saying they were white, they were white. According to what? Your interpretation? Can we validate these claims? We can validate that they were originally a Negroid race, and the scholastic world agrees. First slide. Origin: Japhet, one of the 3 sons of Noah, mentioned last in order, but held by critics to have been the eldest, one of the 8 persons preserved in the ark, and the progenitor to whom is ascribed the peopling of the northern portion of Asia Minor and perhaps Thrace. Most of the nations of Europe are usually deduced from Japhet, who is supposed to be identical with the Greek Japetus, the father of Prometheus. The only specific act of Japhet accorded in the Bible is one of the filial piety to his father when drunken, which obtained for him the prophecy, God shall enlarge Japhet, he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Japhet seems to have been born 100 years before the flood. The length of his life is not mentioned, but his brother Shem lived 502 years after the flood. Genesis 11:11, which may be conjectured to have been the average period allotted to the sons of Noah. It is noticeable that the Greek mythology makes Japetus the ancestor of the human race. Nothing is known as to the locality inhabited Japhet after the flood, but genealogical reasons would favor the immediate vicinity of Mount Ararat. Okay, that's from Johnson's Universal Encyclopedia, Volume 4, page 749. To my right, I have a note. Japetus is reputed as the ancestor of the human race in Greek mythology, which proves that the ancient people of Greece descended from Japetus, which is Japhet. So they have this in their mythos. And what we read earlier, those definitions, they would take historical events and make it mythological. You can find a lot of historical events within the mythos of the people. Okay, let's keep going. Next slide. The locale of Japhet. Japhet, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. They inhabited so that the beginning at the mountain of Taurus and Amenus, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, which I think is in Spain, and settling themselves in the lands which they light upon, which none had inhabited before. They called the nations by their own names, and that's from the Antiquities of the Jews, book 1 and verse 6, Josephus. Examples, because remember he said they called the nations by their own names. The Ionians, which is Javan or Yavana, okay. Meshech, the Moshkoi, Madai, Medus, Tubal, the Timuronoi. Okay, so you can see those names in the ancient peoples, which gives validity to what the Bible teaches. Okay, these historical records give validity to the Bible. That's why Paul said, in all things we can use to those that believe in God. I think it's Romans 8:28. I'm paraphrasing. Okay, so don't be afraid to go through the annals of history and do research. That's what we need. That's what we've been lacking. A lot of these camps and different outlets don't do research. They don't perform a good enough presentation to give an argument to the claims they're making. So that's why people like James White can come in and embarrass our community. We have to change that. But the next slide is a sidebar. Okay, dark. From the foregoing, we may assume that lighter types were certainly not infrequent in ancient Greece, but as a whole, the population was certainly dark complexion. I'm going to read that again. But as a whole, the population was certainly dark complexion. That comes from the source Race and Civilization, page 109 by Frederick Otto Hertz. He said that like the title, Japhet is a Negroid race. The ancient Greece was Javana kingdom. They were regarded as a Negroid race. That's documented with source material, not interpretation. That's why you have to pull sources. You can't just rely on your interpretation. Your mind is fallible, okay? You make mistakes. We have to go what the ancestors recorded when they were there and they were around. What they drew on the frescoes count. But in a Negro's mind, nothing counts but his interpretation. We got to get away from that thinking that is poisonous to our community and will not excel spiritually in that manner. Next slide. In the art, you can see this as well. It says the island of Crete has yielded the first blacks portrayed in art beyond Africa. Among the earliest of these is a profile with very thick lips and snub nose carved in a shell found in southern Crete, dating from the early 2nd millennium BC. A procession of cold black warriors appear in the fresco from Knossos around 1550 to 1500 BC. And another fresco of approximately the same period from the island of Thera carries the profile of a black whose Negroid traits are somewhat reduced, wavy hair, rather thick lips, and medium broad nose. That's page 14 of Before Color Prejudice by Frank M. Snowden. So that's more proof they were originally a Negroid people. Period. The island of Crete, the scriptures tell you that they will be the Gentiles of the isles, the nation of the islands. But we claim we follow the scriptures. Okay. Now, this is from the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge of God, page 404. And I'm going to start it says at Palacio of the women were markedly long-headed, only 8 to 55 of the men, and 587 of the women were markedly short or broad-headed. These figures suggest that the Minoans belong to the dark-skinned, long-headed Mediterranean race. Okay? And the small average stature, 5 foot to 5 inches. So we can see we're pulling sources that they are dark-skinned. Okay? It says, in the small average stature, 5 foot 5 inches, which Dr. Duckworth infers from their bones, leads to the same conclusion the cranial measurements which have been taken of Greeks of classical times have given practically the same results. So the Greeks, the Cretians, they all were dark skinned. The Minoans, dark skinned people. These are Japhetic children. These are Japhetic people. Understand that. On the other hand, these do not seem to include any specimens from classical age in Crete, and Dr. Duckworth's investigation from a modern inhabitants of the same part of the island show that, so far agreeing with their Minoan predecessors, they are brachiocephalic and have an average height of 5 foot 7 inches. The type which they thus suggest is one familiar in the Balkans and the Anatolian Plateau. This race may have reached Crete since classical times, but we cannot exclude the possibility of a mixture of races there in Minoan times, when we find Mr. Evans reminded of the same dark skin but broad-headed Balkan race by the portrait of the cupbearer, because they were examining the art, the frescoes, the vases and the cups and so on and so forth, the coins. You can see dark-skinned people on there. You can't deny the art. Reading on. The fact, indeed, that Dr. Duckworth's investigation only covered a period much earlier than the fresco suggests that we must open up some middle Minoan III and late Minoan ossuaries before the whole problem. Skip some. The whole problem, indeed, that we have to face is one of intrusive elements. Whence they came and what particular contribution they made to the general stock. Grant, with those ethnologists, that practically the whole basin of the Mediterranean was inhabited in Neolithic times by a dark-skinned long race. That this race possesses extraordinary persistence and in spite of the constant invasions and conquests remains the basis of the present population in Spain, Italy, Greece, and Egypt. That is the most gifted race in the world, and that the artistic impulse, wherever we find it in the area which it inhabits, has also been due to it. Grant all this, we are a little nearer solving what is really interesting part of the question: at what times and under what influences in various branches develop their special characteristics and their widely different languages. Now, it says that practically the whole basin of the Mediterranean was inhabited in Neolithic times by dark-skinned, long-headed race. What does Neolithic mean? It means anything before 3300 BC, meaning the original inhabitants of these lands, Greece, Italy, Thrace, okay, Athens, Crete, all these places, the Isles of the Aegean Sea, all these places were inhabited in Neolithic times, meaning a long time ago, the first ones. And what were they skin? Dark skinned people. They were Negroid. They were not Caucasian. They would, in a scholastic term, they weren't Nordic types. So where are you getting this information from? You're getting this from interpretation. That's where you're getting it from. It goes back to that scientific racism, because the word Japhet means beautiful, and they equate beautifulness with fair. And what do they equate fairness with? White skin. Fair does not mean white skin. It means beautiful. So they try to correlate that. But you got to do real research. You have to go deeper, man. A lot of y'all brothers, y'all stuck in this paradigm of just, you go to a precept and then you make your own interpretation. You think that overrides any other knowledge. That overrides what our ancestors wrote down. That overrides arts, frescoes, paintings. That overrides everything in your mind. That is cancerous, and we cannot have that in our community. We must teach people. We must edify and build them up to a level, okay? So they will not be ignorant, so they can actually have an answer instead of, fumbling all over the place, making up stuff as you go. Nonetheless, let's continue on. Let's talk about the Medes. We all know the Medes come from Madai, which is the son of Japhet, of the posterity of Japhet, right? Now, this is from the Black Terror, White Soldiers, Islam, Fascism, and New Age by David Livingstone, right? It says the Scythians were related to a legend popular among medieval Jews who equated with them the lost tribes of Israel. According to the Bible, the Israelites became lost after the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, who dispersed them among the Medes, who lived in Iran in an area known as Media. The Medes, according to the Greek mythology, were descended from Media, the Colchian, which from the story of Jason and the Argonauts, according to legend, Media later married Aegeus of Athens, after whom the Aegean Sea is named. The Medes were descended from their son Medus of Colchis. So the Medes and the Colchians are one and the same. According to a description by Herodotus, a Greek historian of the 5th century BC, known as the father of history, the Colchians who dwelt in the land located along the western slope of the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea and what is now the state of Georgia were black and probably Jewish. Like, just focus on the part where it says were black. Like the Jews of the Palestine, whom he referred to as Phoenicians, Herodotus also regarded the people of Colchis as derived from the Egyptian colony. Why? Because of their dark skin and woolly hair. He not only pointed to the Colchians' black skin and woolly hair as evidence, but also their oral traditions, language, methods of weaving, and practice of circumcision. St. Jerome, writing during the 4th century AD, called the Colchis the second Ethiopia. Why? Because they were dark skinned. Who are these people? They are the Medes. They come from Japhet. What are we proving? That Japhet was originally a dark skinned people. Not the Caucasians. They were not Caucasians. Okay, understand that. It says, 200 years later, Sophronis, patriarch of Jerusalem, described an Ethiopian presence in the same region. Diodorus of Sicily, a historian of the 1st century BC in Universal History, stated, they say also that those who set forth with Danius, Dan, tribe of Dan, likewise from Egypt, settled with what is practically the oldest city of Greece, Argos, and that the nations of the Colchi and Pontus and that of the Jews, which lies between Arabia and Syria, were founded as colonies by certain immigrants from their country, i.e. Egypt, and this is the reason why it's a long-established institution among these people. Because why? These people are dark. All these people are dark-skinned. All these people are dark-skinned. All of them are dark-skinned. Everybody he named on there, dark-skinned. The original inhabitants were dark-skinned. Japhet is a Negroid race. They were initially a Negroid race. Now, you probably be asking, well, what happened? We already know what happens. We're going to get to it later. Next slide. The deities. Let's deal with the deities. Negroes, as was said, were deified as gods in Greek mythology. The chief title of Zeus, greatest of all, was Ethiops. That is black. Other black Venuses were melanaeous, from which is derived melanin, or the pigment in Negro skin. I don't have the source down there, but the source is J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Color Line. J.A. Rogers. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and just insert it. J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Color Line. Color Line by J.A. Rogers. And what he's bringing out in his book is that what? Negroes are said to deified as gods in Greek mythology. The chief title of Zeus, greatest of all, was Ethiops. That is black. That was Zeus' title was black. Why? Because he was Negroid. Right? The first slide I gave you guys. To the right, that's Zeus. Notice the woolly hair. The knotted up hair. The woolly, tightly curled hair. He's Negroid. The chief god of the gods of Greece is depicted as a Negro. Understand that. Why? Because you, as a people, the people that made these gods, they make them in their image. And that's what I'm going to get to in the next few slides. They make it in their own image. They make the gods look like them. Okay? It says that is the other black Venuses were melanaeous, from which derived melanin, or the pigment in Negro skin. To the right, you see Negro Circus offering cup to Odysseus, where you get the Odyssey story, the hero of the Odyssey story. He's black. He's dark-skinned. Cadmus versus the dragon, also coming from the Odyssey story. All black people. The original inhabitants, Greeks, which is Jawan, Minoans, and stuff of that nature, are dark-skinned people originally. The Judgment of Paris. To the left, you have the goddess Hera, the queen of the gods. What color is she? Black. To the right, in the middle, the goddess Aphrodite. What color is she? Black. Next one. It says, their mythology says that Phaeton, son of Helios, the sun god, induced his father to let him drive the chariot of the sun one day, and his lack of skill drove it too near certain lands and burnt black with intense heat the people there. Now, a 3rd century poet tried to say this is how the Ethiopians got black, but the original doesn't say that it went over Ethiopia. Okay? There's even more sources that say the whole earth, because that shows you that the Grecians thought everybody was black at one point in time. And this is how they explained it. Oh, we all got burnt by the sun. That's from Nature Knows No Color Line, page 1 by J.A. Rogers. And you see the Negro coin in Greece, 450 BC era. You can't make this stuff up. Next slide. The poets and myth makers yielded to the coming temptation of man. They made their gods in their own image. Quote from Xenophanes, 5th century. Source, The Myth of the State. Page 55 by Ernest Cassirer. And to the right, you see Negroid Nike, which is a Greek god, depicted as a what? A Negro. So we had Zeus depicted as a Negro. Okay? We had Hera and Aphrodite depicted as Negroes. Now we got Nike depicted as a Negro. The people make gods after their own images. How they look, how the polity looks, how the laity looks. That's how they make their gods. Why don't we see the original gods looking like Caucasian? The original gods looked of the Greek mythos look like Negroes. That's a reflection of the people. Let's go to the Medes. Look, we have art depicting Negroid Japhites. The Medes. Look at the Mede soldiers. Look at that knotted hair. Look at that Negroid textured hair. This is how they would depict it. They would have like knots. Look at that. These are Negroid people. This is the at the palace in Iran. Look at this. Dark-skinned soldiers. And we know the Medes and the Persians ruled at this time. So there's no confusion, man. The confusion comes with your own interpretation. That's where the confusion comes. Period. So the next slide. This was found in Thrace. The fiale or the fiale, I don't know how to say that, but it means dish, concentric rows of Negroes. These are all Negroes. What is this doing in Thrace? And why is it gold? You mint things in gold that you want to honor. Why is this gold? These are all Negroid faces found in Thrace. The Chigi vase found in an Etruscan tomb at Monte Alguzo. This is in Italy. It is the earliest representation of the hoplite phalanx formation. Around 650 BC. All black warriors. Why? Because the original people of Japhet, the original inhabitants of Europe, the Northern Asia Minor, Thrace, Athens, Greece, Italy, Spain, were dark Negroid people. This is what happened. They mixed with Esau. Miscegenation with Esau. And we check out my video I did prior about who is Esau. I brought the facts and information about that. About the different legends and historical documents that prove they did that. But Esau is a Middle Eastern people, and Japhet were the European people. They were the people that lived in the European locales. Well, you can clearly see what happened. Last slide, but certainly not the least, the rise of Macedonia. We have seen that Greece was never a unified nation. There was even dispute throughout the history of the Greeks as a people as to exactly who were entitled to be styled Greeks. This was disputed. Why? Because you had a people that were not of the original or aboriginal people like today, with the Native Indians. I use them as a perfect example. You have people claiming to be Native Indians that signed the Dawes rolls, and you have the original descendants of the Native Indians arguing back and forth, having disputes with these Caucasian people trying to claim their legacy and their history. The same thing happened back in those days. What does the Bible tell you in Ecclesiastes? There's nothing new under the sun. The same thing happened with those Greeks. So I'm going to read again. There was even dispute throughout the history of the Greeks as a people as to exactly who were entitled to be styled Greeks. In particular, the question arose in reference to the Macedonians. Who are who? They are Edomites. They come from the Timidai. The Timidai is who? The people of Timon. Who is Timon? The descendant of Esau. Y'all got to learn to know what y'all speaking about. Y'all need to know the information before you open your mouths, so we can be better represented as a people. But anywho, in particular, the question arose in reference to the Macedonians when they came to power under the leadership of King Philip, father of Alexander the Great. The Macedonians spoke a dialect of the Greek language, and Philip ardently contended that he and his people were entitled to be considered as true Greeks. He had to contend to be noticed as Greeks. Okay, in the public eye. Why? Because they weren't Greeks. They weren't the original people. Simple. The claim was hotly contested so long as the people of Greece, in the narrower sense, had the power to hold out against the man whom they regarded as a usurper. He looked at Philip II as a usurper, someone trying to take control of their lands. But in the end, claimed Philip received official recognition, and his subjugation of Greece was not regarded as the conquest of a foreigner, but merely as establishing the hegemony of one Greek state over others. Because he eventually killed everybody. He killed the people and made them come under his control. So now you're going to recognize me as Greeks after I killed you. But before, it was hotly contested with the original inhabitants of Greece. It says, but merely as establishing a hegemony, meaning the ruling class of one Greek state over the others. Macedonia, and now taking the leadership which had been held in turn by the Athens, Sparta, and Thebes. In the broadest view, this way of regarding the Macedonians as really Greeks was perhaps not illogical. The question is the exact origin of the Hellenes is still in much doubt. But the more the matter is investigated, the more certain it becomes that the wonderful people was a mixed race. Throughout history, everywhere. Why? Because you had Edom, like I covered in my last video. Esau was mixing with the Hittites. He was mixing with the Etruscans, okay, with the people of Crete, okay, and then he eventually came during the period of the Greeks and tried to take over all these lands, okay. Not tried, he did. But let me read on. The question of the exact origin of Hellenes is still much in doubt, but the more the matter is investigated, the more certain it becomes that the wonderful people was a mixed race. Throughout history everywhere, the ethnologist points out that it is the mixed race which develops the greatest potentialities. In the case of the Greeks, is no exception to the rule. One speaks of the Greeks as Aryans, and therefore naturally associate them with the Persians and Indians on the one hand, and the Germanic races on the other. Yet in point of fact, it is probably only in relation to their speech that any such close affinity exists. If the theory of the Mediterranean race with its Central African origin be true, why? Because of their dark skin and woolly hair. Then the Greeks, considered ethnologically, were much more closely associated with the so-called Hamitic Egyptians and the so-called Semitic Hebrews, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Phoenicians than they were with the so-called Aryan race. Why? Because they were Negroid. The original people of Greece, the Jawana Kingdom was Negroid. Period. All discussion of this exact point is still somewhat problematical, but it's quite clear to the most casual physical inspection that the Greek is of a physical type much more closely akin to the dark skin and dark eye Mediterranean races than to the fair skinned, blue-eyed Indo-Germanic tribe. Those are Edomites. He's saying they're not the Edomites. They're not Idumeans. They're not of Esau. They are from Japhet, which is a dark Negroid race. Throughout this whole presentation, I have been validating that point. No vague interpretations. No, oh, brother, this scripture says no. A brother gonna try to tell me, or I seen on the video, let me put it like that because Esau was blessed with the sword, and since the flag of Saudi Arabia has a sword on it, then that means no, that doesn't work. That's a vague interpretation. That's very silly. That's unintelligible. You can't make claims like that. You're not using anything to back up what you're saying. This is scholarship. Okay? Understand that. But let me read it again. That the Greek is of a physical type much more closely akin to the dark-skinned and dark-eyed Mediterranean races than to the fair-skinned, blue-eyed Indo-Germanic tribes. Yet the language of the Greeks is unequivocally of the Indo-Germanic family. Quite possibly the explanation of this anomaly may be found in the theory of prehistoric invasion of Greece by Germanic race. And then that's the end of it. But that's from Greece to Roman Conquest by Henry S. William, page 208. That's when it completely got dominated by the Macedonians, which Alexander came from, and that's when they usurped and took the name of the Greeks. Just gave it to you. But the original inhabitants were black. Let me go back up there and read that again. Maybe This video is dragging on too long, and we forgot the initial point. Let me go back here. From the foregoing, we may assume that lighter types were certainly not infrequent in ancient Greece. But as the whole, the population was certainly dark complexioned. Source, Race and Civilization, page 109 by Frederick Otto Hertz. Okay? What's the conclusion? Japhet was originally a black, dark Negro race. Okay? End of discussion. Scholarship over BS. So no more vague descriptions. Genesis 49ers. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. More presentations full of sources that you can, so the viewer can go home and read this information themselves. You can write this stuff down, take notes, record it, do what you need to do. Share this video throughout the various social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and be on the lookout for more videos like this. I say shalom to all my brethren, brothers that might have different perspectives. I say shalom to you as well.
As always, if this appears on anything other than Dr. Tracy McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. Now, we have frequently looked at the itineraries in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, and we've also looked at correlates related to names of principal places of purchase, places of landing. We've also looked at vessel names and sometimes the names of the captains and the owners of the ship. What we're going to look at now very quickly is a notation related to Benin not only being a place of principal purchase, but also the name of a number of vessels. And you can also see that there's a correlation between Benin as the name of a vessel and the principal place of purchase and ships coming out of Liverpool and Bristol. And this is all in the 1700s. Some of you may remember that Benin is not only a country, but that name has also been applied to a past empire, a past kingdom. And here we see a depiction, purported depiction, of the king of Benin in Negro land. And as with depictions of America, purported depictions of America, you can also find depictions of Africa in Ogilvy's work. And just as the Black Panther was important and integral to the identity of the fictional kingdom in Africa known as Wakanda, as you can see here, the leopards are integral to the understanding and the nature and the identity of Benin. And just as a quick reminder, the Edo people are also known as Bini, and they are the people of southern Nigeria who speak a language from the Benue-Congo branch of the Niger-Congo language family. And interestingly, this particular kingdom flourished between the 14th and 17th century, and this is also the time frame during which the Lancados were asked to leave Europe. And so this takes us back to a quick discussion of the first Benin, also known as Bini and Beni. And so we're going to quickly look at the first Benin prior to the kingdom and the empire, the country, and the people known as Bini inside of Nigeria. And what do we have here? We have Benin history, family crest and coat of arms information. What we have here is the ancestors of the Benin family took their surname from a place name. The roots of this place name lie in the ancient Viking settlers. So the Benin surname comes from someone having lived in the old barony of Beni in the parish of Opal in the county of West Lothian. And you also see here that the Benin surname was first found in West Lothian, and it has been there since very ancient times. And so clearly this precedes the 14th through the 17th century. And here we see that there are a number of spelling variations. You can see here some interesting ones. You have Benin, you have Benning, you have Benny, you have Benning, as in surname Benning, and a variety of other ways of spelling Benny and Benning. You also see the Benin motto for the Benin family, and that is by valor and craft, which also translates into by power and guile. And this ancient Benin surname is most noted in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and interestingly, India, Ivory Coast, Italy, Brazil, the Philippines, and France. And here you can see a variety of similar spellings related to Benin. And a quick look shows that West Lothian is in Scotland. One thing that's noted about this West Lothian area is that it is the home of a number of burial mounds. This is also a place where the King James V maintained a royal residence in Scotland, and also Mary Queen of Scots. And as another bit of trivia, you can see another impressive royal castle is at the edge of the Village of Blackness. And also you can see that there's some interest in getting a better understanding of the Benin genealogy as it relates to Hebrew surnames. And we're going to quickly look at this heat map to see the prevalence related to this Benin family and this surname. And you can see that it is most hot, the block is hot, in Nigeria. And so you have a 100% match. Nigeria, global incidence 7,942. And you can see that it's extremely hot in the Nigeria area, but this name is widely dispersed pretty much around the world. And we previously noted the affinity for a number of individuals in the West African area, particularly in the Nigeria area, for wearing kilts. And you can see them playing in procession, playing bagpipes. You can see the individuals with significant tartan plaid, and tartan plaid actually signifies different families, so different clans. And so based upon this undiscussed relationship between Benin, Africa, and the Benin family of Scotland, this particular dynamic makes a little bit more sense perhaps. And so understanding this history of this name, the etymology, one of the things that might make more sense now is the military regalia in the history of the Benin Empire in terms of them wearing kilts, as you can see on the screen. Another thing to take note of is this dynamic whereby a number of individuals in Africa currently, and a number of individuals identified as African American, they possess the R1b haplogroup, and that means that there is a descent from a common ancestor. So there's a shared ancestor way back. And so this has been very notable because this is also the most common haplogroup for men who are now located in Western Europe. They also have one of these R1b branches. And previously there was the notion that the reason why quote-unquote African American men, Black American men, Negro American men, the reason that they had this was because their great-great-great-grandmother was assaulted at some point in time in the past by someone who was of Western European descent. And so you can see that this dynamic is a little bit more complicated than many people may have previously realized. If you want to read this entire article, you can see the information up here. It's in Human Genetics, and so you can read that. But again, this is very important information in terms of understanding the history of the name Benin, the people of Benin, And it's also helpful for shedding light on this dynamic of Iberian, quote unquote, DNA finding its way throughout Africa and then finding its way throughout the Americas. And so there was a significant amount of migration related to the Lancados, perhaps, that might explain this dispersion of this DNA. This should provide food for thought for individuals who are pretty insistent that all brown people in America are indigenous to America, and for those conversely who believe that all brown people in Africa are indigenous to Africa, because it is clear that you have individuals who are in positions now, but they may not have been in those positions historically. And so for those who are claiming expertise in American history and Indian history, it's important that those individuals get more clarity related to European history and Middle Eastern history and African history so that they can understand the totality of that dynamic a little bit better. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.